This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with our good friend Kieran Troy about his book, In the Stars and the Glory of His Eyes, Tales of an Italian Tour Guide in Rome. After 20 years of running tours in Rome, Kieran has experienced many different stories, and he has captured some of these in his fantastic new book. One of these stories was with our Irish World War II hero, Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, and on this trip, we carefully followed his path in Rome. Let's hear from Kieran. Kieran Troy, my good buddy, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Greg, thanks.
We go back a long way, and I'm thinking the airport in Rome, 2012.
First time we met, Greg, was in the airport in Rome. I was already there.
You were already there.
You arrived on a plane, and I met you in the airport in Rome.
You were our friendly tour guide who met us at the other side, and that started a long relationship and many trips to Rome that followed after, and lots of stories. And, you know, it's fantastic that the reason we're chatting today is about a bunch of stories that you captured in your fantastic book, which is just after coming out. The book is called In the Stars and the Glory of His Eyes. And as you say, it's Tales of an Italian Tour Guide in Rome. I can't wait to hear more about the book and discuss that in detail. But before we get into all that, I want the listener to get to know you a little bit, get to know the lovely person that we've got to know since 2012. I'm not sure if you remember, we attempted a podcast sitting in a busy airport at one point in time, and for whatever reason, I think there was loads of background noise or something, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I remember that. It was Ciampino Airport in Rome, the small airport.
Yeah. So Kieran, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
I suppose I'm from a small place outside Birr in County Offaly. I'm in my 50s. I've been working as a tour guide in Rome for more than 20 years now. And I've been married to Laura. She's Italian since the year 2000, 22 years. Originally, when Laura and I got married, I was actually teaching English in Rome. But we quickly got into the travel business, and we've been doing it ever since. So originally we would have just focused on taking Irish people to Rome. Now we have expanded, and we're doing, Poland and France and Austria and Switzerland and different places, Portugal as well. But basically, our work has been like that. We have got 3 children. After we got married, we lived for a few years in Italy, and we moved back to Ireland then because my wife wanted the kids to have a good Irish education, probably better standard of education here than there would be in Italy, unless you go to a private school in Italy, which would be expensive. So for that reason, we moved back to Ireland more or less permanently, probably around 2007 or thereabouts. And we bought a house here outside Tullamore, and we've been doing the trips ever since. We're a small company. We're deliberately small. We've had it a few times when we were being encouraged by others to go bigger and take on staff and everything, but we've actually deliberately kept it small and tried to make it more, I'm not sure what the word is, but kind of intimate, that each trip wouldn't have to conflict with other trips at the same time. Now, it has the odd time it happens. We have 2 groups in Rome at the same time or whatever, but that's very rare. And we try to give all of our attention to a group when it comes. So
yeah, and for the most part, when someone gets a tour with Kieran Troy, you get Kieran Troy, don't you? And that's the magic of those trips. Now, you're after totally cheating my format on the Win Happy podcast, because I want to figure out how you ended up doing these trips to Rome in the first place. So going all the way back, you were growing up in Offaly, just outside Birr.
Yeah.
What did Mum and Dad do?
My dad's a farmer.
Okay.
And we'd be farming people back to Stone Age times, you know what I mean? We're really still farming stock My dad died quite young, and
How old
so
was he?
he was 60.
Did that have a big impact on you?
Yeah, it would have had all right. I think it destabilized our family a good bit.
Who was in the family, Kieran?
So I had two brothers and two sisters. We were all kind of teenagers, more or less, at the time. And my mother was thrown into the deep end because she had to manage the farm and everything. This is 1980s. The farming wasn't very profitable in the 80s. So it was a tough time for my mother. But she was a great woman and got us through it. She's still alive now.
Did you work on the farm?
I would have, yeah. Just with my brothers, you know how it is, Greg, that when you grow up in a farm, you spend all your time working on the farm basically when you're not in school. So we were all immersed in farming, the whole lot of us. Then I went to college. I wasn't really sure what to do with myself, but I studied computer science for a while. And this was in the 80s now. It'd be very different computer science to what you do nowadays. And then I actually went to seminary for a few years, but I felt it wasn't the right life for me.
What attracted you to that life, Kieran?
I suppose the biggest thing in my life is my Christian faith. You know, I basically believe that we're created in the image and likeness of God, and that our ultimate end is in heaven. So our lives should reflect that fact. You know, that we're not here by chance. We're not just material. We have a spiritual nature, and that spiritual nature could be, despite all appearances, it could be the most important part of our lives. So I was always attracted to the faith, and then, you know, I think it's a mistake, but in Ireland in the 80s, and probably later than that, if you were interested in the faith, people thought, oh, you must be getting called to the priesthood, you know, which is a wrong idea because we're all spiritual creatures, and it doesn't mean that we're being called to the priesthood, even though being called to the priesthood is a great thing. And you and I know some great priests, Greg, I know that.
I know you're saying it's not the only idea, but in some respects, did it present itself to you as being the only idea? Was that the only way you could express that?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, and people would say that to me. You know, people would say, "Oh, I think you have vocation to be a priest," because I was interested in the Bible and interested in theology and that kind of thing. But then, I mean, seminary is a time of discernment. You go in, and it's great for me, you know, because I did a degree in theology, and I still does me a lot of good to have that, and it gives you time to think and to discern. And I discerned that it wasn't the life for me. Go ahead in that life. You need to have a degree of certitude and conviction, and I didn't have it. So I left then, and I was a bit at sea then for a while.
Can I just ask you about that, servitude and conviction? I know you quite well. I would say you have those things. And is it just that model, that formula in the Catholic Church for being a priest, that just wasn't possible?
Yeah, because it is a very particular way of life. So you would need to, as Catholics, understand it, a special calling, special calling. And I didn't feel that I had it eventually.
Because I had a pastor on the podcast a few months ago, and he's very like you, a man with huge belief in everything, but he's a married man and he has children, and it seemed to me to be the most normal thing ever. And I think his parishioners will be blessed and lucky that they have him in their parish or whatever, and he's a man of life experience as well, so I think you can relate to them in such a better way. So if I kind of presented that back to you in that way, if that was a possible route, which it obviously wasn't in the Catholic Church, might that have been your path, do you think?
No, I don't think so. No, it was a different issue. It was a lot of different things. It wouldn't have been the issue of being able to get married.
Okay.
No, it was to do with other things that I felt that I should be considering apart from a way of life, of ministry, So what happened then, Greg, was when I left there, I went back to college because as soon as going to college is the easy thing to do, You can kind of hang around and see what happens. So I went back to college, back to Trinity. And then just by coincidence or by chance or whatever, this is around 1997, there was an event going on in Rome. It was beatification, and there was the Irish groups going out, and they were looking for anybody who would be willing to travel with them, young people. And I was asked to accompany this group from Kilkenny. Okay, so and I accompanied them, and I really enjoyed it. We were in Rome, we went down to Sorrento, we did a huge trip, and then we went up all the way up to Venice. We did incredible driving, you know. Now there was a tour guide with us. I still remember her, even though that's 35 years ago. She was great, and it was a great experience. So then I went back to Rome with that company, and I started doing trips, which was just like a summer job, you know. I mean, they kind of threw me in the deep end because I didn't have the knowledge of all these places that we were visiting. But I mean, with a good guidebook, you can read up the day before and get the hang of it. And then over the years, I just got to know more about it. And then in the year 2000, which is the year we got married, that kind of work wouldn't have been sufficient to survive. So I was teaching English, because teaching English you can do during the winter, whereas accompanying groups is something you do during the season. So for those 2 years, 2000 and 2001, I taught English during the most of the year and accompanied groups. And then in 2001, Laura and I decided to begin our own company then.
Cool.
We started off very small. We did 2 groups the first year. We did 5 the second year. We did 10 the third year, 15, 20, 25. It was almost exponential, you know. And then we had to put a break on it because it was too much. It was too much work, you know.
And I can understand it was too much work, because based on our experience with you and our group, I'm sure it's like so many other groups, they're a mixed bag of young and old and organized people and disorganized people. And it must have been like herding cats an awful lot of the time.
Yeah, it is. You know, it's that's the kind of work it is. It's big groups, so there's a lot of responsibility, and a lot of things go wrong. A lot of things go right as well. But you know, my basic job description, people think it's guided tours. My basic job description, I tell people, is to get them on the plane back to Ireland in one piece.
Yeah.
You know, if I've done that, I've succeeded, even if the week has been a disaster. That's the number one priority, is everybody safely back on that plane to Ireland.
Even if they lose their passport along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're now sharing an in-joke about one of the lovely priests that came on the Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty tours, which was our good buddy John Ahern, if he's listening. And yeah, we're just arriving into Rome, and he's coming through the gate, and he realizes passport has gone walkabout.
Yeah, mystery. That really was a mystery. I don't think it was ever found either. Yeah, but yeah, it's just one of those things that it looked like as if there was no way he could enter the country, and everybody was telling us, security guards and everything. And then suddenly, somebody decided, yeah, he can come in. And he walked in, and we managed to get him an emergency passport then to get him home. But I still don't understand what happened there, to be honest.
What's the most difficult or interesting or funny thing that's happened in all of your time with these groups?
I think the most difficult things always have to do with flights, Greg. So what you have is, and you probably have experienced plenty of this yourself. I mean, 15, 20 years ago, it was volcanic ash. Then you have strikes. You have air traffic controller strikes. You have pilot strikes. You have all kinds of weather conditions. So that's the most difficult thing, is the disruption of flights. And it does happen. Sometimes it happens one week after another. You know, I remember once flying home from Rome to Dublin, and our pilot came on kind of in a panicky voice. He wasn't very professional, saying we're going to have to land or something around the aircraft. So we had to land in Lyon, and we were there for hours. You know, eventually we got home. And just a week later, I was flying back I've never been in Lyon in my life, you know. We were flying back from Sicily to Dublin, and something similar happened. Birds crashed into the plane on takeoff, it seems, but they must have been still stuck in there somewhere or other. So we had to land in Lyon again. And, you know, it's difficult for people because a lot of people who travel with us are elderly, retired people. Some of them could have serious illness or whatever. So I think the flight is the thing that is most difficult for people. and most tiring and stressful, Say funny things then. Yeah, lots of funny things happen. It's hard to describe them because you get in big trouble, You'd have to change names and identities and that kind of thing. But yeah, lots of funny things happen. Like, for example, hopefully nobody will remember who this is, but we arrived in Rome. The flight arrived early in the morning, and we were too early to check in at the hotel. We knew this beforehand, so it was all planned. We were going to go to the Trevi Fountain, of all places, the Trevi Fountain. The Trevi Fountain is a great place for lunch and for sandwich. There's a load of restaurants in the area, and we had to kill time until 2 p.m. So we said we'll visit the Trevi Fountain, we'll let them go free for lunch. We all got back on the bus then, but there was one man missing, and he was basically missing till the next day.
Oh, God.
It was very funny in ways because of the kind of character he was, but I won't tell you how we found him because that'll give his identity away. But yeah, all kinds of things happen.
I'm thinking you didn't sleep that night a whole pile, Kieran, did you?
No, and poor Lara back in Ireland was phoning, everybody, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Irish police, the Italian police, everybody was on the case,
You and the horrors, that the one thing you absolutely promised that you need to do, you've lost someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not a good testimonial for your business, Kieran.
No, very bad. All I'll say is it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, we had a great trip, but yeah, unfortunately, Kieran managed to lose one of our group. Other than that, we had great fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one thing I admire so much about you is that the trips are so personal, and the reason we kept going back is that they were so enjoyable. But every single time, and we were going in there in the context of Hugh O'Flaherty, and I'm sure you had your, maybe a standard type of a trip with the different options on there. But every single time you dug deep, you did the research about Hugh O'Flaherty, you managed to find even more things that were relevant, down to the particular spots where people lived and where he visited. And we were talking earlier about the golf club where he used to play. And not only realizing where it was, but, trying to organize us, despite their best wishes, to visit the place and make it real for people. And those trips, besides us getting quite close, all of the people on those trips get close. And every trip, I'd nearly go as far to say they have a personality of themselves. Each trip does. And then, of course, that's a mix of the actual personalities that are on the trip and the things that happen along the way. And you're the conductor all of the time. And you go deep and you research, and they're so enjoyable. So well done to you. And, of course, Lara in the background doing all of that work as well.
Yeah, Lara's doing a lot in the background. But those Hugh O'Flaherty trips were interesting, Greg, because, like you say, there wouldn't be the usual trip, because the usual trips, every trip is different, but you generally, with pilgrims in Rome, you visit the tombs of Peter and Paul, the catacombs, and that kind of thing. We still did that with your group, but we also had to find out some stuff about Hugh O'Flaherty. And because the group came back different times, we couldn't just do the same stuff we did the last time. So it was absolutely necessary to do a bit of digging, And the golf course that you mentioned was really interesting for me. I got really into it because there was a story that had been recounted in the first book written on O'Flaherty by Gallagher back in around 1960. And it said that O'Flaherty had found this colony of refugees at the golf club, and he'd looked after them. He'd really become their everything for them. He found jobs, he clothed them, he found houses, he baptized them. But when we got to the golf club, they said, no, there's nowhere like that around here. There's no church. We were given a very definite no, that it just couldn't have happened here. And we wanted to visit that church because it was such a great story. And O'Flaherty had spent years dedicating himself to these people, And just by chance, we did find it. And it was in the bushes, basically, just off one of the greens. And there we visited. It took years. It took 5 years. But the Salesians eventually opened it for us because they owned it, and they allowed us to step inside. And my favorite photograph from all of those trips, Greg, is you, Deirdre, and Jerry standing in the doorway of that church, because it was such a challenge to find it and to get it opened and to just remember everything O'Flaherty had done in there. But like you say, it's not something you'd have to do for every group, but it was great to be able to do it for this group here. And also, I think that story tells us an awful lot about Monsignor O'Flaherty.
And I know that's one of the 9 stories that are in the book. We're probably making a big assumption now that the listener will know who Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty was and what he did. Can you just maybe give a quick synopsis of the fantastic man?
Yeah, so Monsignor O'Flaherty, he grew up really at the gates of the Killarney Golf Course because his dad was a caretaker there, and he was a very good golfer from a young age. He wanted to become a priest, and he was sent to Rome, and he went to the Propaganda Fide College, which was the branch that deals with sending priests on mission, and he was ordained a priest there in the 1920s. But he was such a talented guy and such a sociable and had all these qualities that they didn't want to let him go on the missions. He was supposed to go to diocese in Cape Town in South Africa, but they kept him on and they gave him a job in the seminary, and eventually he was drafted into the diplomatic service, which is like Ireland has ambassadors, the church has nuncios. So he was drafted into these nuncios and he went to different places and did great work overseas. And then he was given a job in Rome in the Holy Office, which is an office that it's a congregation of the church that investigates people and events and writings and makes sure they're all kind of in line with the doctrine of the teachings of the Catholic Church. He was working there when the war broke out. When the war broke out, Italy was on the side of the Germans. So O'Flaherty was living in the Vatican, which was on neutral property, but the Vatican got permission to visit the prisoner of war camps around Italy, in which Americans and British and all the Allied soldiers were being held, because they wanted to inspect them and see that they were being given proper treatment. And O'Flaherty went on, accompanied the bishop who was assigned to this task. O'Flaherty became the main man visiting these camps. And it was incredible, this story. He would go to a prison camp. He would bring cigarettes and books and everything. He would check all of the conditions. Then he would take a train back to Rome to Vatican Radio. They would, using Vatican Radio, they would be able to put out messages to the Allies on which soldiers were still alive, which was very important for the families back home. And then he would return back by train or whatever and continue the visitation of the camps. So because of all these visits, O'Flaherty became well known among the prisoners of war. I'm sure he was a hero for them. But then in 1943, Italy changed side in the war. Mussolini was arrested. And for a brief period of time, Italy became free country. And the prisons of war were opened and the Allied soldiers walked free, but only for a few weeks because the Germans quickly occupied Italy. So it was no longer Italy and Germany against the Allies, and suddenly it was just Germany, and Germany was occupying Italy. Now, they did have help from Italian fascist supporters, but all of these prisoners of war then were on the run. So where did they go? They headed to Rome because they knew O'Flaherty, they had met him in the prison, and they knew the Vatican was neutral ground. So O'Flaherty quickly, and with great courage, resourcefulness, he set up what became known as the Rome Escape Line. In the beginning, there was just 3 people involved. There was himself, the butler to the British ambassador to the Holy See, John May, and a guy called Count Salazar. And they set up this Rome Escape Line, which was basically hiding Allied soldiers around the city, feeding them, clothing them, and moving them. It's an incredible operation. It began and quickly ran into thousands of people. So O'Flaherty then, he ran this escape line. He wasn't just running it from his office. He was out about in the streets. He was carrying money and food. He had a whole network. And the leader of the Gestapo in Rome, Kappler, learned quickly that O'Flaherty was the ringleader and tried a number of occasions to capture him. So his life was at risk. And during those months of the Nazi occupation, O'Flaherty saved the lives of thousands of people. There's no doubt about it. Not just soldiers, also Jews. And you remember, Greg, we met families of those Jews in one of the visits. So after the war, O'Flaherty was recognized by the United States government, by the British government, by loads of people. He was given a pension by the British government. He never drew a penny of it, which shows you the kind of guy he was. He didn't want recognition. He was just this very heroic individual. And there are lots of them around Europe during the Second World War, but not that many that could rank with O'Flaherty for the achievements and the number of people he saved. So he's one of the great Irish figures of the 20th century, I would say.
Yeah.
And so then, thanks to you and Deirdre and Jerry O'Grady and Father John Horgan, you've managed to get the story of O'Flaherty kind of lifted up to a higher profile, put up a great monument to him in Killarney. And then the Memorial Society organised these trips to Rome, and we were blessed to be involved in them. The reason we were involved in this is because Father John Horgan, who's since passed away, had come on a pilgrimage with us to Rome and knew us. So when the Memorial Society decided to go to Rome, he contacted us and we put together the first trip. And then I think we did 4 trips in the end over the space of about 6 or 7 years.
And the amazing thing was that he had been recognised and his story was recognised, but that was a long time ago. There was a book, The Scarlet Pimpernel of the Vatican. He was called the Scarlet Pimpernel because of his clothes and the colour of them, and he was dodging Kepler at the time. And then coming from that book, there was a movie with Richard Burton, and Gregory Peck played him in that movie. So that was in 1983, I think. I'm not sure if that date is correct.
The Scarlet and the Black.
Yeah. And then Brian Fleming, I think he was the vice principal of a school in Dublin, basically wrote a book about him. And I was on a flight coming back from Berlin, ironically, and we had gone to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, where on the plane, the way the plane will hand you out a free newspaper, at least they did in those days. And there was a review of a book that Brian Fleming had written. And, D's from Kerry, and I'm reading. I actually thought it was fiction. This was, a fantastic story about this priest, this big, impressive priest with loads of character who was dodging the Nazis and all that kind of thing. And then I realized it was actually true. And I'm on the plane, I'm nudging Deirdre saying, do you know this character? She had no knowledge of it. We were doing a lot of work in Killarney at the time with Jerry O'Grady, who was in the Killarney Chamber. And I was asking Jerry, we kind of know a little bit. And if you went into the local park, in a place you'll be hard pushed to find, there was a tiny little cluster of trees with a little plaque. And at this point in time, Kieran, I'm freaking out. And only boring history classes did we suffer in school. We had a genuine World War II hero who was born in Cork, who grew up in Kerry, our neighbour, and we know nothing about him. And, I was getting hot under the collar, and we were doing that bit of work in Kerry. And so we need to change this. And we got onto Brian Fleming. We ran a little photo exhibition, taking the photographs that he had in the book. And we ran that in a premises down there. And we invited some children to come and witness it. And then we said we'd commission an artist to do a portrait of him, to start fundraising for the statue. And then we put into contact with, oh my goodness, the singer. Do you remember her name? Ronnie. She's a classical singer who went to Rome.
Oh, yes. I know who you're talking about, yeah.
Oh, my God. Veronica Dunn.
Veronica Dunn, yeah.
Yeah, so we were trying to reach out to people who would have known Hugh O'Flaherty. And we believed there was a person that was very close to him who was a classical singer called Veronica Dunn. And as a young woman, she had been sent to Rome. And he was to be her guardian, to keep her away from all these Italian, suave guys, as we know they can be. And I remember a really powerful moment. It was an event in one of the hotels in Killarney. Veronica was there. We unveiled the painting in front of her. And I swear to God, Kieran, there was a moment when the whole room just stood still. The tears started flowing down her eyes. Because this fantastic artist, guy called Stephen Murphy, for her captured that bit of devilment and character that he had in abundance. Yeah. And that was the beginning of all of that journey. And before we knew it, there we are at the airport in Rome meeting you, and our adventures began. So this is the story of Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty. What made you bring pen to paper or get your computer going and start writing? What happened?
So, Greg, what happened there was, in 2005, we had a parish group from County Galway who travelled with us, and the leader was Father Sean Higgins, who was this great character. He was humble but full of enthusiasm. He loved Rome, a great people person. So he wanted to go back to Rome and visit all these places he knew well, and he wanted it to be this really special pilgrimage. So he spent nearly a year preparing it, and he kept ringing us and meeting us and doing different things. And it was great, But he died just a few days before the group was due to leave Ireland because he had cancer. He expected to be able to travel. He was on chemotherapy, but in any case, he died suddenly. So I think the funeral was the day before they were due to leave. And we were thinking, because this trip is not going to happen, Lara and I, but they did. It went ahead. And during the week in Rome, it's hard to explain what they were. You could call them coincidences. Some people call them God incidences, like little blessings from heaven. And people are going to say, gosh, it's like as if Father Sean is here with us, So when that trip was over, I used to tell people the story. And they would say, oh, write it down. You should write that down. So eventually I wrote it down. It was like an essay, about 6,000 or 7,000 words in it. Then I would show it to people and say, oh, you should get that published. But one story like that, you couldn't really do much with it. But eventually then over the years, I just accumulated other stories and put them together into a book. I mean, it's been written a long time. Most of them were written a good few years ago. But in 2019 then, I sent it to Ignatius Press it was actually January of 2020 in San Francisco. And they took it on. I was very lucky, Greg, to get a book published, you need to be lucky by a traditional publisher, because there's so many books being written. It's very hard for publishers to sift through all of the manuscripts that are coming towards them. And most manuscripts are probably not really considered, even if they could be good, But I was lucky in that, just for luck, I sent a chapter to a guy called Joseph Pearce. Joseph Pearce is an Englishman living in the United States. He's a great expert on Shakespeare and literature. He's a professor of literature. He was an ultra-nationalist back in possibly 1970s or 80s. He was even supporting the UVF in Northern Ireland. He was against anything that was not British, But he even spent time in jail as well because of his things he had done. But he was converted in jail. And he would be now very... he really is a changed character. So he read this first chapter of the book and said, I think that's worthy of publication. And he sent it to Ignatius Press. So the fact that he sent it meant that they read it. If I had sent it myself, I don't think they would have read it, or would probably not have, So it's good luck that way. I just got Joseph Pearce at a good moment.
What you were saying about that first trip and maybe Father Sean Higgins looking over your shoulders, and you were saying whether it was faith or what do you think was going on?
So I suppose, what do I think was going on? Yeah, well, like I was saying earlier on, Greg, I do believe in that spiritual reality, that we're not just material beings, that there is a God up there, and that God is guiding everything. He's given us freedom, so he doesn't force himself on us. He allows us to follow our own path and to find him. He's calling us, he's giving, and I think that what happened here is that in that particular events of Father Sean, I don't want to do a spoiler, but there were a lot of things happened, especially in the beginning, which made it look like as if this trip was going to be an absolute disaster. But everything came good against the odds, and that's what made us feel, we felt blessed. We felt that heaven was smiling on us, So what happened there, I think, is that you had this group of people. Many of them were relatives of Father Sean. Many of them were his friends. They were in bereavement because he had just died. But through these events, they were actually consoled and felt close to him and given hope. And that's how one of the ladies said it on the last day of the trip. She said, this trip, we thought it was Father Sean organizing a trip, and we wanted him to enjoy it and him to be here. We said, this trip was for us. This trip has done us a lot of good, because of all the things that happened. So it's like a heavenly consolation of them in their bereavement. But it's funny, the way sometimes you meet people again and again, like yourself, Greg, and I'm glad you did come back with other groups. lot of our business is repeat business. But Father Higgins Group we've never seen again. Not one of them. Never seen one of them. 2005, we had this brilliant trip. I've never seen one of them. And there's this lady central to it. Her name is Margaret. She was like the rock that kept that whole thing going. I just wrote to her the other day to tell her that this book has been published, and I'd like to send her a copy if I can have her address. But I wrote to her a message by text, but I don't even know if Margaret is still alive, but I'm hoping to track her down and send her a copy, because I think she'd enjoy that chapter on Father Higgins, her great friend.
Is there a theme running through the other chapters? Again, it's difficult to talk about it and not give away everything, but what will people get from the book? What can...
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. There is a theme. It's in the title. You probably recognize the title, In the Stars, the Glory of His Eyes. There was this great Irish leader of the 1916 Rising, Joseph Plunkett. You know his story, because he married his sweetheart Grace in the prison, and then was taken out and shot. You know that story. In fact, on one of the O'Flaherty trips, Monsignor O'Flaherty's great grandniece, remember, Catherine's daughter, actually sang that song on the coach as we were going somewhere. But anyway, he wrote this poem, and the first two lines are, "I see his blood upon the rose, and in the stars, the glory of his eyes." So it's referring to seeing the work of God in nature, So that's why I chose the second line, "In the stars, the glory of his eyes." I suppose that's the theme running through it, is that we have all these trips and all kinds of things happening, places and dates and everything, and we're planning and trying to do things as best we can. But sometimes our plans come undone. In fact, I think this book is a book about my plans coming undone, basically, from start to finish, but a higher plan being fulfilled, and God visiting us and shining on us from above. That would be the theme of the book, I think.
So in a way, Kieran, it is a collection of nice, warm, funny stories about your time in Rome and all these different trips. But it is through a particular lens, which I think what you're saying, this is one of hope and spirituality as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I would hope so, anyway.
Is that it for the writing?
So I wrote that book before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, we had, I suppose, a couple of years of very little work. I mean, we weren't able to travel with groups. We spent 2 years organizing trips and then sending refunds to people. That's what we basically did for the past 2 years. But because we were always hoping that the trips would go ahead, but they didn't. But anyway, I wrote a second one then. And the second one is very similar to the first. There's 9 chapters, 9 stories, and they're all different. And they're all true. You see, sometimes people say that didn't really happen, but it did. What's not true in the book, and if you manage to get around to reading it, you'll see why. Like, I had to change some people's names and circumstances and places and dates so that they won't be recognized, because it could be embarrassing for them. And I can't afford litigation, So the little details are changed. But if somebody reads something in the book and they say that couldn't have happened, then you can be sure it did happen, because the bigger things actually happened, as the little things have been changed in it. So I did write the second one, and then the third one. The second one is written. I'm working on the third one, and I'm hoping to do 4. But like I say, the publisher takes one at a time, and they probably won't publish the second one unless the first one is reasonably successful. So I have to just wait and see.
I can see a movie coming out of it, Kieran. Yeah, it makes for a good series on Netflix or Amazon, doesn't it?
I don't know. I'm not sure, Greg. I'm not sure if it's the right subject matter.
Yeah, you'd never know. You never know. And this book, In the Stars, the Glory of His Eyes, The Tales of an Italian Tour Guide in Rome. How can people get the book, Kieran?
Oh, yeah. So it's on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and type in that title, In the Stars, the Glory of His Eyes, you'll get it up straight away. You can get it on Amazon. If you have a Prime, you can get it through amazon.co.uk, but I think there is some delivery charge on it. You can get it on Kindle. That's the cheapest way. You can get it from Book Depository. Book Depository doesn't have shipping charges, so that's sometimes the cheapest way. But Book Depository, we're selling a load of copies, but I see today they're sold out for the moment. but they'll get new ones in. And then Veritas, Veritas is an Irish book company. A couple of people told me they got it on Veritas, and the price was pretty good, and the shipping was low. So Veritas you'll find it there on Veritas as well.
It's a good time of the year for buying presents. I'm certainly getting one or more lovely presents for anyone. You are on the Win Happy podcast, Kieran. What's happiness to you?
Well, I think that obviously nobody has actually asked me that question before, Greg, so really I'm on the spot here now. I think that happiness is different to pleasure. Okay, I think you can agree with that. It's different to entertainment. There has to be meaning in it, I think. I think that because we see people who are happy, who sometimes are suffering, and we see people who are genuinely happy, who have all kinds of stress and difficulty in their lives. So happiness goes beyond pleasure and entertainment and warm, fuzzy feelings, that kind of thing. For me, I think and I think for a lot of people probably, it has to do with meaning, that whatever you're doing in life is meaningful. And also for me, okay, but maybe this is the Catholic part of me, that I wouldn't feel happy if I had something bad on my conscience. Okay, so if I was running a dishonest business and I was ripping people off, I can't see how you can really be happy in that circumstance. I think that you have to have integrity in your life to be happy. You have to be living a principled life, trying to live a virtuous life. If you have bad family relationships, big, what's the word? A big breach in the family, where you're not reconciled to. Look, sometimes you're not reconciled to people, and there's nothing you can do about it because they refuse to be reconciled. But if you're responsible for not being reconciled, thank God I get on very well with all my brothers and sisters. So for me, that's a major pillar of happiness. In the past, a few times maybe I had a few problems here and there with brothers and sisters, and I certainly wasn't happy then. So I don't know, Greg. It's like I would say happiness is a whole series of pillars. It's having good family relationships, living a virtuous life, a life of integrity, doing something that's meaningful. So obviously a lot of people find that they're working in jobs that they don't find meaningful, and that's not their fault, because often the jobs that we end up getting are kind of involve a certain amount of drudgery. You can still be happy in those jobs when you're working to support your family and all of that. So I think that deeper sense of working for meaning. Does that sound like a satisfactory answer?
It's your answer, so of course it is. It's all yours. And we're in the middle of the World Cup.
Yeah.
And of course there's winning, and all of those teams do all their preparation. And I suppose for some people winning is getting there. For others it's getting out of the group. For others, nothing will be enough other than winning the whole thing. Maybe for individuals it'll be becoming the top scorer.
Yeah.
What does winning look like for you?
Winning, yeah. Gosh, I could be tempted to reduce it to something like regarding work. For example, there were years in the past when we were working and we were struggling to make a profit. Thank God it didn't happen too often, but we might be tried to say winning is when work is going well and the books are balancing. And but I think that for me, if I was to choose again, I mean, it's coming back to some of those happiness things, but it has to do with good relationships, Greg. That if it has to do with having a good relationship with my wife, with the children, and with my brothers and sisters, and the people, neighbours here around us. So if all of that is going well, I mean, obviously I'm a married man and a father, so being a husband and being a father are the two main things in my life. And winning is when I communicate well with the kids, when I manage to control my impatience and anger, which I didn't manage very well last night, incidentally.
What happened?
Well, just my wife is away because her dad is not well, and she's been away for a few weeks. So I'm keeping the ship afloat here, and laundry and cooking and homework and exams, and so I felt I wasn't being supported enough. You know.
So you're
Um,
human as well as everything else, Kieran.
oh yeah. I think winning is though, Greg. It's a good question. It's about those relationships and being able to relate to people and just keeping control of the egoism and the self-interest and being virtuous, really.
Yeah,
You
but
know.
like the analogy I given is back to a sporting one, is that you might love playing football and it gives you great happiness. But if we went onto a pitch and kicked the ball to each other back and forth for hours and hours, it might feel a bit pointless without goalposts. So maybe I could ask you, hitting the back of the net, what are the hitting the back of the net moments for you?
Oh yeah. Again, I would say, like, obviously, I don't want to get into anything that's too personal, but I think that around the time I was married, it was 22 years ago, I would have been much more uh, egocentric, if that's the right word, than I am now. And that has to do with, almost like a bachelor like existence and treating women as objects, for my pleasure or whatever. And also quite a superficial approach to life. And I think hitting the back of the net is, I suppose maybe I'm returning always to the same thing, but if I bring it back again to relationship with the children, it's to be able to put them first, just to overcome all the self interest that's there, and give them a good example. And it does work. I've seen it working because children are, and we know it, Greg, very very selfish. And the way that they sometimes get over that is when they see us as good models, And I find that I have seen some great examples in the last few years from our children of when they have managed to overcome what I wouldn't have thought they would be able to do it, overcome what they wanted and to give in and allow others, So that's hitting the back of the net. I feel then that I've been a good father, at least some of the time anyway.
I've no doubt about it. I've one last whopper of a question for you. Are you ready for this one?
I don't think so. Like,
I'm killing you here. I'm killing you here,
yeah,
kid. What was your best day ever?
my best day ever. Gosh. You see, I'd love to be able to say it was my wedding day, okay, but I can't say that because I was too distracted and worried, and we were in Italy, and family was there, and there was all kinds of issues going on, So I couldn't say that. I mean, in objective terms, it was the greatest day because it's the day that Lara and I made the promises to each other and began what hopefully will be, good, very good union, all of that. But you want me to tell you what I felt was the greatest day ever, isn't it?
Yeah, your best day.
So yeah, gosh, there's no candidates emerging here from in my mind. Maybe the day that Stephen was born. That was the first child. So because we had been trying to have a child for 6 years and we weren't having any luck. So when Stephen was born, and I saw him, he wasn't well when he was born, or at least they thought he wasn't. He actually turned out he was fine, but they put him into a kind of it looked like a little spaceship, and wheeled him off down the corridor. And I was out in the corridor, and I just saw him for the first time. That was a great moment, and also it was a great moment not just for me, but for me and Laura, because we had been trying so hard to have children. We'd done an adoption course, and it took like 2 years to do the adoption course, and we'd come through it because you have to be approved in Ireland to adopt children. We'd been approved, and we're just ready to go to Vietnam or wherever we need to go to adopt a child. And then Laura conceived Stephen. So when he was born, it was great. It was just a great. It was just like as if all our dreams had come true there and then.
The ball hit the back of the net.
That's it. Yeah. But the girls, then obviously the birth of the girls was great as well. They were different. They were done. I was present by cesarean section, so they were absolutely great days as well.
Fantastic. Well, Kieran, thanks a million for coming on the podcast. And even more than that, thank you for your friendship and the great times in Rome. So, Kieran, there might be a trip in 2023. Would I be right?
There's nothing confirmed yet, Greg. You see, there's some significant dates coming up. Ordination of Monsignor O'Flaherty. Then there's the foundation of the Rome Escape Line, which was 1943. So we're 80 years next year. So some people were saying that'd be a good year to go, but it might not happen till 2024. I think it's still in the planning stage.
Okay. Well, if it does happen, it'll be a huge pleasure. And if not, maybe we can get together at some point, either here or in Rome.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for taking all the time to do this podcast.
My total pleasure.
And it was always great for me to travel with you and Dee and Jerry. It was, I my trips I've done maybe 400 or 500 trips, but the trips with you guys would be right up at the top for the best trips ever.
Yeah, lots of stories and memories for all of us, which will never leave us. And you had the foresight to capture one of those in writing in the book, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Greg.
Yeah, Kieran, take it easy.
You too.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.